More often, it begins with disruption. Something in your life that once felt stable suddenly feels uncertain. The routines that gave you security no longer seem to hold. The plans you built carefully begin to unravel, and the people or circumstances you thought you could lean on shift unexpectedly. It's in those moments that we often cry out, asking, why is this happening? But what feels like chaos is often the very evidence that God's hand is at work. You see, before an artist begins to paint, the canvas must first be cleared. Before a sculptor brings form from stone, the excess must be chipped away. And before God can write the next chapter of your life, He must first disrupt the patterns that are keeping you confined to an old one. Disruption is not destruction, it is preparation. But because we are wired to crave stability, we often mistake the dismantling for disaster. We cling to the comfort of what we know, even when what we know is no longer serving the purpose God is calling us toward. Psychologically, we resist disruption because it destabilizes our sense of control. The human mind is addicted to predictability. We draw maps in our imagination of how our life should unfold, and when those maps are torn apart, we feel disoriented. Yet disruption exposes the fragility of our control. It reveals that the security we built was more fragile than we realized. In that awareness, something profound happens. We are invited to let go. We are invited to surrender the illusion of control so that God can take us into uncharted territory. Without disruption, we would never release the grip on what is comfortable, and without releasing what is comfortable, we would never discover what is possible. Philosophically, disruption is necessary because transformation never comes through preservation. It comes through change. Every great story has a turning point, a moment where what was can no longer remain if something greater is to emerge. In literature, it's called conflict. In life, it feels like uncertainty. But in God's shaping, it is the very soil where growth begins. Consider how seeds break open in the dark before they take root. The shell must crack, the structure must change, and only then can new life push through. The same principle is woven into our lives. The breaking is not the end. It is the beginning of something that could not be born in the soil of sameness. And here's the paradox. Disruption often comes disguised as disappointment. The job you lost, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that fell through. Those moments don't announce themselves as holy. They arrive heavy, unwelcome, and painful. Yet time and perspective often reveal that what felt like a closed door was actually God's protection or redirection. The chapters we try to cling to most tightly are often the very ones He must close to open something more significant. That's why when God is shaping your story, disruption is not an interruption of the plan. It is the plan. Think about it this way. If nothing in your life ever shifted, you would never shift. If no doors ever closed, you would keep walking through the wrong ones. If no relationships ever ended, you would never discover the people who truly align with your destiny. Disruption is the mechanism God uses to wake us from autopilot, to break the cycles that are keeping us small, and to reposition us for what we cannot yet see. And while disruption feels like loss in the moment, it often becomes the birthplace of meaning in retrospect. So the question is not whether disruption will come. It will. The real question is how you will interpret it. Will you resist it, clinging tightly to what was, Or will you allow it to refine you, to strip away what is no longer needed, and to prepare you for what is next? The choice is not always easy, but it is always transformative. If you can reframe disruption as divine preparation, you begin to see that the shaking is not to destroy you, but to stabilize you on a stronger foundation. When God is shaping your story, disruption is the first chapter of creation. It is the tearing down of walls so that a new structure can rise. It is the breaking of soil so that seeds can grow. It is the closing of one door so that the right one can open. What you interpret as the end may very well be the beginning of something beyond what you imagined. And perhaps the most powerful act of faith is to trust in the middle of disruption that God is not finished. He is just beginning. So when disruption enters your life, don't simply ask, why me? Ask instead, what is being made possible through this? Because every time God shakes your story, He is preparing you for a chapter you could never have written on your own. When disruption comes, it doesn't simply rearrange the circumstances of your life. It begins to press deeper into the core of who you are. This is where the shaping work of God moves beyond external shifts and starts touching your identity. And that is often far more uncomfortable than any external change. Because circumstances can shift, but identity is the foundation on which those circumstances rest. If the foundation is unsteady, God will not build further upon it until it has been strengthened, purified, and realigned. One of the most significant struggles we face as human beings is the story we tell ourselves about who we are. That story is rarely pure. It is often shaped by old wounds, the opinions of others, cultural expectations, and the shadows of comparison. Over time, we begin to wear masks that keep us functioning, but not necessarily flourishing. And when God is shaping your story, He cannot allow those masks to dictate your future. So He begins to refine your identity, not by giving you new information about yourself, but by stripping away the false narratives you've been carrying. Psychologically, this is one of the most profound processes of growth. Human beings have what psychologists call a narrative self. It is not just the events of our lives, but the meaning we attach to those events that defines how we see ourselves. For example, if someone experiences rejection early in life, they may grow into adulthood telling themselves a story of unworthiness. Even if external success comes, that inner narrative can whisper, "You're not enough." When God begins to shape your story, He doesn't simply rearrange external blessings to cover that wound. He goes straight for the root of the false identity. He allows experiences that force you to confront it, not to punish you, but to free you from it. Philosophically, this process is about authenticity. The Greek philosophers spoke often about living in accordance with your true nature. In Christian thought, this true nature is not simply self-defined, it is God-given. You are not what your failures have told you. You are not what the comparisons on social media suggest you should be. You are not even the sum of your achievements. You are, at the deepest level, a reflection of the image of God. But until you begin to live from that truth, your story will always feel fractured. God's refining work is to burn away the lies so that the truth of your identity in Him can stand unobstructed. And this refining is rarely easy. It can look like God pulling you away from certain people whose approval you once craved. It can look like closing the doors of roles or positions that made you feel validated, but were never aligned with who you really are. It can even feel like loneliness at times, because when the layers are being stripped back, you may not immediately recognize yourself. That in between place where the old identity has been dismantled, but the new one has not yet been fully embraced, is one of the most vulnerable seasons of life. Yet it is also one of the most sacred. This is why faith is essential here, because God's refining is not about who you think you are. It's about who He knows you are. And He will not let the weight of your calling rest on a counterfeit version of you. Imagine trying to carry your destiny with the wrong identity. It would collapse under pressure. But when your identity is rooted in truth, when it is anchored in the unchanging reality of God's vision for you, then the external storms cannot shake you. The paradox is that in losing the identities we thought defined us, we finally gain ourselves, the person who was trying to perform, impress, and constantly prove their worth begins to dissolve. In their place emerges someone who lives not from fear, but from freedom. Someone who acts not out of insecurity, but out of conviction. Someone who knows that their value is not tied to applause or success, but to the eternal worth God has already stamped on them. That is what refinement produces, a self no longer defined by masks, but by truth. So when God is shaping your story, expect Him to press on the fragile parts of your identity. Expect Him to challenge the labels you've worn for too long. Expect Him to strip away the false comforts of approval and performance. And though it may feel like loss in the moment, it is actually the most profound gain. Because in the end, God is not shaping you into someone else. He is shaping you back into who you were always meant to be. And if you can embrace that refining, you will discover that the greatest freedom is not found in becoming something new, but in finally living as the truest version of yourself, the one God envisioned long before the world tried to tell you otherwise. After disruption has unsettled what you once trusted, and after God has begun refining the false layers of your identity, there comes a stage that feels both mysterious and frustrating, the waiting room of alignment. This is where God does His most hidden work. It is the stage where life feels strangely out of your control. Opportunities appear to stall. Doors that seemed open suddenly shut, and people you thought would walk with you drift away. From the outside, it can look like delay, but beneath the surface, something far greater is unfolding. Alignment is happening. God is arranging details you cannot yet see, synchronizing your steps with timing, places, and people that will carry you into your purpose. This stage tests us deeply because human beings are wired for immediacy. We crave evidence of progress. Psychologically, our minds are conditioned to equate forward movement with visible results. When nothing seems to be happening, we assume we've been forgotten or abandoned. But this is a misunderstanding of alignment. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean nothing is moving. Think of tectonic plates beneath the earth. They shift invisibly for years, and then in a single moment, the surface breaks open with dramatic effect. Alignment works the same way. God is shifting things beneath the surface of your life until the right moment when it all comes together in ways you could not have engineered. Philosophically, this stage confronts our relationship with time. We live in a culture obsessed with speed, where value is measured by efficiency and productivity. But divine alignment doesn't operate by those rules. God is not rushing to meet our deadlines. Instead, He is weaving something that transcends the short term. His perspective is eternal, and that means He is more concerned with what lasts than with what comes quickly. When God aligns your life, it is not to satisfy an immediate craving, but to position you for long-term significance. And that requires patience, which is one of the hardest disciplines for the modern soul. But patience in this context is not passive. It is not sitting idly by while you wait for things to change. It is a posture of trust, an active choice to believe that what feels delayed is actually being prepared. Psychologists often speak of delayed gratification as a marker of maturity, the ability to resist immediate satisfaction for a greater long-term reward is what separates children from adults. Spiritually, alignment is God's training ground for this maturity. He uses hidden seasons to stretch your capacity for trust, to cultivate resilience, and to deepen your faith so that when the alignment manifests, you are not only ready to receive it, you are strong enough to carry it. One of the challenges of this stage is that it rarely makes sense while you're in it. You look back later and realize that the closed door was protection. You realize that the person who left made space for someone who was meant to walk with you. You realize that the delay was not denial, but development. But in the moment, it feels ambiguous, and ambiguity is difficult for the human psyche. We long for certainty. Yet it is precisely in this ambiguity that trust is born. Trust is not required when everything is clear. It is required when everything is hidden. If you think about some of the most meaningful moments in life, many of them began in seasons of waiting. The dream job, the life partner, the breakthrough opportunity, they often arrive not when you expected them, but when you had been prepared for them. That is alignment. It is not random chance. It is the invisible coordination of divine purpose intersecting with human readiness. And that readiness could not have come without the waiting. So when God is shaping your story, don't be surprised if alignment feels like silence. Don't be discouraged if it looks like nothing is happening. Remember that the most important parts of a structure are laid before anyone sees the building. The foundation is hidden, but it is the only reason the building can stand. In the same way, your hidden season of alignment is what ensures the story God is writing through you will not collapse when it rises. The temptation in this season is to force things, to try to push open doors, to chase relationships, to engineer outcomes. But forced alignment is fragile. What God aligns cannot be shaken because it is rooted in timing larger than your own. The invitation is to resist the urge to manufacture and instead to cultivate trust. Because when His alignment is revealed, it will be undeniable. The pieces will fall into place with a precision that could never have been orchestrated by human effort. And so, if you find yourself in the quiet stage of unseen alignment, take heart. God is not absent. He is arranging. He is not delaying. He is designing. And one day, when the threads come together, you will look back and see that every closed door, every delay, every hidden moment was not wasted. It was necessary. Alignment is the evidence that what God begins, He finishes, and what He finishes, He perfects in His time. When the disruptions have broken apart the familiar and the refining has stripped away the false layers of identity. And the long silence of alignment has tested your patience and trust. Something remarkable begins to happen. Purpose starts to emerge. Not suddenly, as though it falls out of the sky fully formed, but gradually, like the first rays of light at dawn stretching across a dark horizon. You begin to sense that the pieces of your story, which once felt disconnected, are now weaving together into a pattern. The pain that once seemed meaningless takes on context. The waiting that once felt wasted